You got to be a fantastic storyteller and tell the story to get through the first number of years.
Today, I'm sitting down with Jamie Gull, the founder and solo general partner over at Wave Function Ventures. Wave is an early-stage venture capital firm investing in deep tech. They invest across aerospace, defense, manufacturing, robotics, and energy.
For founders and them to build early-stage teams, there is not enough talent to fill all the good ideas.
Now, Jamie has a unique background as an aerospace engineer. He spent 5 years at SpaceX, and he's deeply technical, which makes him very different than most folks running early-stage venture funds today. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and remember to go direct. All right, and we're live. Jamie, what is going on?
All sorts of things. How about with you?
Good. Well, we're gonna get into that. All right. So great. So if I'll tee this up here, if we're ever gonna have a more decentralized real economy, the heart of this new system is going to be decentralized production. And the reality is, if we want decentralized production and a more decentralized real economy, we need systems that are simply just better than our current ones. And the only way this is going to happen is obviously with technology and new forms of cleaner and cheaper energy. And so this is exactly what you're investing in. And so I thought it would be a highly relevant conversation, not only for the listeners here, but also to just tell a little bit more about what you're doing at Wave, which we'll get into because it's something you just launched. So appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks. Yeah. So I'm Jamie. I'm the founder and solo GP of Wave Function Ventures. I'm a Fund One doing hard tech investment, aerospace, defense, energy, robotics, infrastructure. Have a couple energy deals, so definitely relevant today. And I can get into my background if you like, or we just go through it.
No, we're going to step back. We're going to step back before we get into that stuff. Everyone starts with the background. All right. So you use this term techno-industrialist or techno-industrials, I should say. Break that down for us. Unpack it a little bit.
Yeah, we've kind of thought about industrials in a classic way for a long time. Techno-industrials is folding in new technologies, but especially a lot of more modern digital technologies, and how do they get plugged into the industrial stack, and thinking about that in a vertically integrated fashion, rather than here, let's do some old industrial process in a traditional way, but do it better. So it's folding in a lot of new technologies into the industrial stack.
Cool. So I guess the simplest way to think about it, using that term, is just kind of breaking it down back to first principles and saying building with the tools and the technology we have today to reimagine
at a systems level, systems level trade-offs, rather than doing it in a silo or a horizontal level.
All right, so let's break that down, because it's right. So for many people, that's counterintuitive when you hear the terms. You've already mentioned them. Infrastructure, hard assets, deep tech. People typically think capex heavy, lower margin, all the buzzwords and traditional way of thinking about this. So from your perspective, obviously you're kind of in the early stage venture game, which is the high risk, high reward bucket. Why does this make sense at this time? From a venture standpoint, it goes against conventional wisdom for the broader population, I would say.
Yeah, it definitely does in some ways. I mean, if you go back to the origins of venture capital, it was hard assets. In Silicon Valley, it's called Silicon Valley, right? It's not called zeros and ones Valley. But yeah, for a long time, for the last 20 or so years, it's been heavily focused on mostly purely software. And the reason being, you can replicate it at scale for essentially zero marginal cost. So once you've hit a product that works, your outcomes can be huge. And for a long time, that was the focus. And there was somewhat of a myth around hard assets or capex heavy programs won't get you good returns. And what we've seen is, because of that perception, it was almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, because not enough capital was going into it, and not enough multi-stage capital. There wasn't enough government support. And so it would get underfunded, and there were very few companies that were extremely successful at it. And that paradigm was essentially broken by Elon with SpaceX and Tesla. He's kind of proven that, sure, it might take you 5 or 10 years and a lot of money to get there, but the scale on the back end is so big that you can get software like returns. And so as that capital stack has recognized that, they've filled in those stages. The government has stepped in with non-dilutive funding. People are starting to do more asset-backed lending, debt, venture debt, et cetera. It's like a whole stack. And it's made it much easier for people to succeed. And so now is the right time. It's been recognized. And the fact that we haven't put enough investment into those sectors for that time period means they're lagging. It's a lot of very stagnant industries that haven't innovated in a long time, just ripe to be disrupted.
So you got to talk about the stars aligning, right? From a geopolitical standpoint, obviously the private capital markets. I mean, capital markets just accrue to where the opportunity is, and it's clear that they see an opportunity there. And so you hear his big, especially with the Trump administration, a big push for reindustrialization. But in your minds, is there one or two pieces, the biggest pieces missing? You just spoke how everyone's coming in to fill these holes, but what's missing now for us to realistically be able to industrialize many different parts of the economy?
Yeah, there's a few things that are changing for the positive. And I mean, there's kind of the two biggest pieces is yes, there are positive changes happening. We've seen very positive executive orders, for example, but the regulatory environment is still overly burdensome. And not in like we need to protect ourselves from doing something really horrible way. It's just like, let's protect ourselves from doing anything kind of way. And so, I wouldn't advocate for willy-nilly, do whatever you want. It's all about the economy. Like we should do this carefully, but the pendulum swung way too far into like severe protectionism. And the other piece that ironically, I think is missing a little bit, but has enabled this change is talent. And so when I was in college, right, I was studying aerospace engineering at Stanford. All of my friends were doing computer science. I had a bunch of like famous founders everybody's heard of, were people I went to freshman year dorm with and still friends with. And that's where they want to win. I wanted to build aerospace. I happened to like luck in to SpaceX being a thing. To be a little bit honest about it, like I got a job there. It was the only company I wanted to be after my first job, but it wasn't very popular. And when I left, and even a few years later, it was the number one most desired employer in the country for an engineer. Now that could be software, that could be mechanical, whatever. And it started this like talent flywheel there in Tesla, I think primarily, and it became so attractive. And what happens is you get enough college grads coming in, but then you also have enough alumni like myself going out to do other things, and you just start like a talent flywheel. But when we're looking now for founders and them to build early stage teams, and you really have to have like an incredible team in hard tech, there is not enough talent to like fill all the good ideas. So that piece, like I hope continues to grow, but it's one of the hardest things to do as an investor in this sector, because if you don't have a top-notch team, like you're just going to burn through a bunch of cash and be done really fast.
Yeah, and you're typically dealing with a much more, like you said, you're dealing on the hard tech side with much more like systems level problems, right? And that's like usually much more cross disciplinary and stuff. So I could imagine it being an issue. The talent comment you made is pretty interesting. I think about like when I was coming out of school, and I think the reality is that it's an interesting question or interesting perspective, because you kind of had an idea you wanted to be an aerospace engineer and this what you wanted to do. I think the reality is the majority of us, including myself, coming out of school, like everyone's exploring with what they want to do. Yeah. So it's kind of what your point is. You're saying it's where's the market pull come from?
Yeah, it's market pull and for sure, but like being a hard tech engineer is hard to explore, right? Like the killer folks they're doing project teams in college or high school even, right? Like it's hard to go explore it for a couple of years. It's not like going to get an MBA. where you're like, oh, I'm going to go try business. So there are people that do it successfully. Like there's, some severe polymaths that can pull it off. But in general, it takes like quite a few years of dedicated effort.
I would actually say that that's kind of with anything, but
Fair.
but I get it. All right, so you mentioned something I want to dig into because I don't know if I caught it correctly, but it was an interesting comment. You said the pendulum swung way too far towards protectionism. So, in what context? I want to drill into that. I didn't follow that fully.
Yeah, it's a like a bureaucratic, mostly on the government side, but also on the public perception side of like, let's not do anything if there's a risk to something. And that's just not how the world should operate, right? Like we take risks every day, whether we think about it properly or not, but like on is my expected value, right? Like if you're really thinking about it properly, higher than the downsides. And if you pull up like NEPA right now is kind of the classic example where like we allowed anyone to sue any project at any time for any reason and stall the project out, right? I'm in the nuclear sector with a couple companies as portfolio companies, and I think that's a great example where you had the government side, which was too protectionist, but also you had the public side, and they'd be like, for whatever reason, somebody whispered in my ear that nuclear is bad, and you can have that debate, but like now I'm going to go sue somebody because there's a frog there, and it delays it for 5 years, and they run out of money, and it's like maybe that's valid. But it shouldn't be allowed to be any reason by any group can file a lawsuit and delay a project. Like there needs to be some kind of realism to the situation. And like, is it worth killing off a frog? Like you can have that debate and people have different opinions on it, but there was no real debate there. It was just like, I'm going to sue you and this will delay you so long that you can't build it.
Yeah. Okay. I understand. It's an interesting one. I mean, you should try spending more time in Europe, and then we can talk about protectionism. Because by the way, it's not just environmental, which it goes way deeper than that. Agreed. But it's ironic, right? So it's like, okay, and being from Detroit, it hits close to home for me, where it's like, hey, let's hollow out the entire working class, outsource everything to low cost labor, and completely move away from a production oriented economy. And then once we have that, then if we have this protectionist perspective of anything, it just stalls progress. So like there's no possible way that we can reindustrialize with that protectionist.
Yeah, that's the fear. And it's like the push towards globalization like made sense from a pure dollars and cents point of view, but it also is predicated on the notion that the world will forever be like happy-go-lucky friendly with each other. Not even counting hollowing out your own working class, but it is predicated on that notion. And that's just, if you look through history, is a really bad mindset to take in the long run. And we're seeing that play out right now, right? Like, and we're kind of stuck.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I take it a couple steps further. This is like ultimately, I would say, one of the main reasons why I wanted to do going direct, which is it transcends just like investing in technology. This comes down to like communities to me, and this comes down to actually our happiness and the connection to the things that we buy and the people that make them. Mm-hmm. And I just think it runs so deep for me, like I said, because I'm from the suburbs of Detroit. So, but like being in a town that was basically, the mentality across Metro Detroit is just a very blue collar mentality, regardless of what type of background you come from. And I remember very vividly growing up, like my grandparents, it was out of the question not to have to own a car that was not made in Detroit, because my grandparents' colleagues and people, their neighbors and stuff, they worked on the assembly lines, or they were managers, or like it was part of the fabric of like who you were. And I think that goes so deep. It's like, once you have more factories and facilities, and the the father of your son's friend who plays on the baseball game works at that factory or that facility that makes the thing that you consume. I don't know, it just creates a much stronger connection to place. So I
Yeah.
don't know.
No, definitely interesting. And yeah, and it gives people a pride of place, pride of that they're producing something that the community values.
Yeah. Okay, so one of the reasons why I was really interested in having this conversation was the fact that you are an aerospace engineer and you do have a very technical background. And you know, I wanted to get your perspective on this. Then we'll get into the nitty gritty. But obviously, kind of the deep tech, hard tech movement over the past few years has really gained momentum. Many different and new funds and some of the smartest money in the world is all going full on all in on just that the broad kind of concept of deep tech, hard tech, techno-industrials. Anytime that typically happens, in any markets, you start to get froth or just a lot of people trying to do incremental things, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
So are you seeing a lot of are you already seeing smoke and mirrors being formed, whether it's from the venture and investment side or even from the operator side?
Yeah, both for sure.
Let's break that down. Let's go on the operator side first.
Yeah, the operator side is a little bit, well, certainly more incrementalism. I would argue that in this sector, and one of the things I focus on is like if you're trying to innovate on a component and do that through venture, whether that's like extremely component, like I don't know, a hinge is like maybe an extreme example, but a lot of people are like innovating in say sensors or something like that for satellites, and it's incremental. You're just not going to win, right? Like you're going to sell that to some satellite company doing Earth observation. Somebody else is going to figure out something adjacent. You're going to compete. Price is going to drop down. You capture no value. So you're just not going to get a venture scale return. And those should be like a more traditional businesses. And they have been traditionally. So I've seen more of that. And that would kind of fall under incrementalism. Um, I'd say on the smoke and mirrors side, there's been some things that for me don't pencil out. I'm always aware that like I might be missing something. But even when you start doing some back of the envelope modeling and tack on some even aggressive, like a lot of talk around curves these days, right? It's the Moore's laws that are being translated into deep tech. It's batteries, solar are the two biggest examples. But you start tacking those on launch costs. If you're looking at space, you start like putting those on things and still not seeing it pencil out. And yet, companies have raised tens of millions of dollars off of it. And it could be that what I'm missing is somebody's willing to pay, right? For some reason that I don't know about, right? Maybe it's defense. Maybe it's like, I need a data center no matter what next year. And if it's 10x more expensive because I'm going to put it in space, I'm going to pay for it. But I've seen some things that just don't make sense to me. Like you run the numbers and you're so far off, and it's not even like, oh, you have to make generous assumptions and then it pans out. But again, sure. I might be missing something on something.
No, I always find it interesting. It's this, which is interesting because the common phrase of investing, especially when you're talking alpha or whatever you want to call it, is you should be investing when no one's investing in it, and then once everyone starts,
so that could be a good example. And like, I'd rather if you gave me two bets, that or a satellite sensor, I'd take that bet any day, because if it works for some reason, works big, and that's what you're after. So.
Yeah, it's one of the things which we'll talk a little bit more about. I think when you think about reindustrialization or techno-industrials, what my hope is, even on the early stage side, to be honest, my hope is other forms of capital that are not necessarily structured as venture funds, and they're looking to take high amounts of technology risk, do enter the market. It might be a little bit more boring, but I think there's a lot more needed, I would say. And because obviously venture funds are structured a certain way and you're looking for certain return profiles. So
yeah, there could be something interesting where you've seen some VCs start to take bets that look more like private equity.
Sure.
And maybe you'll see some more private equity groups making bets that look a little bit more like VC, except for it's in those kind of industrial sectors and maybe don't have the scalability or margins that some of the other bets do that are pure VC plays. But yeah, it would be nice to see some more of that kind of mixing up.
Yeah, I read, follow some, who Sam Lesson is from Slow, Slow Ventures or the Information. I don't know if you
Yeah.
felt. Yeah, I've seen some of his stuff, and he has some interesting takes on kind of like value seed investing, and then specifically right now how everyone who's in seed investing, they're completely they're kind of rethinking everything because everything is changing. Company formation is changing in the face of AI. Then you have this whole kind of techno-industrial space coming online, which is a totally different thing than anyone that's been actively investing over the past 15 years has no idea how to deal with, basically.
Yeah. I mean, kind of your earlier point too, like those are the places where investment hasn't happened a lot. And the question is, can you play on the edges, or are the people pouring into the same stuff pouring into the right stuff, and you just got to jump in?
Sure. All right, let's drill into each area that you're focusing on, because I want to really get more into the nitty gritty on this. So, so the three areas: aerospace, defense, energy, and then manufacturing and robotics.
Mm-hmm.
So within each one of those, go one by one. So, like aerospace, defense, kind of talk to us about what you're finding most interesting right now.
Well, I
And what
separate
you're
those out personally,
okay.
but um,
Okay, so go aerospace first.
yeah, aerospace, and I would even separate that into space and aero. Space is, of course, an interesting one. Having been at SpaceX, it's it's one of the hardest sectors for me to invest in because of them. It seems like anything of ultra high value will be captured by them if they want to, right? It's kind of this if, and uh, a lot of money has been poured into like Earth observation. There have been some good winners. None of them have been absolutely enormous, and there's a lot of players in there. So like that's like people looked at that and said, "Hey, I can put in a different sensor at a different altitude and put a different data system in. There's going to be all these customers." And what usually ends up happening is like the government's a customer, they're a decent customer. You sell some small like trials to Walmart, the classic example of how many cars are in the parking lot, and maybe an early insurance play. And then like you're not really seeing tons of back end large contracts on the commercial side. So I'm a little skeptical around those things for sure. I've done one space investment. It's kind of out at the edge. I don't know if you want to talk about specific investments. I actually can't talk about that one. So
It's more, I think, more of just like kind of getting people understanding kind of what you're thinking about and what you're finding interesting in the space.
yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, space in
Space.
general, like I laid out EO, which is like very common. And then I see a lot of stuff around lunar or other like ISS replacements. Those are tough for me because you're making a huge leap of faith between now and then. I'd rather see something that can start making money with fairly good certainty. You want to see like if you put the right technical pieces together with the right team, you know there's a market. They just have to execute. And so with those plays, you're adding in this layer of, is there a market? Well, theoretically there should be, but how is somebody who has to raise a ton of venture money going to wait out that 5 or 10 years or longer? And it's really hard to make those plays. Again, that would be like folks like SpaceX start building up those capabilities with their lunar if they actually go there, right? Which is a huge question mark. And then you could start to see more of that making sense from a near term perspective.
Cool. All right, let's move over to the aerospace side. What are you finding kind of the most interesting?
Yeah, I mean the drone stuff is wild. I'm like both bullish and bearish. I'm bullish in the sense that like clearly the world is going that way as an added capability. The reason I'm more bearish than some folks is the markets that makes the most sense aren't that big. And like you can look at Ukraine right now as a perfect example. But hopefully that war ends relatively soon. Maybe it won't, but even if it doesn't, is that like a massive long-term market? And do the big markets really want this capability at scale for a long time? I think they want it at some scale, but the U.S. right is the biggest market, at least that I play in, and we're here, and all that stuff happens whatever, 8,000 miles away, maybe more. Drones don't go more than 100 miles generally. And so how do you have to be able to project power. So you have to be able to get them there and then deploy them at some scale that makes sense. And the reality is some of the like impacts they have is just not that high compared to the other weapon systems we have. So I think they will play an important role for us, but it's not going to be like what some people predict, which is everything will be small drone warfare. Like I just don't see that being true. Like we just went into Iran a few months ago. You think that had anything to do with drones? There's probably a Reaper overhead, like with eyes on, that we deployed over there, which is a relatively exquisite system, right, compared to all the other drones. So it has to play full stack and play a part in it. But it's hard for me to like look at that as like this enormous market long term.
Yeah, I feel like, well, I guess most markets are this way, but it seems to me as someone, I don't follow the space that closely, but it just seems I'm an LP in a couple of funds that do have some investments around the space, and it just seems like there's just going to be kind of one or two that'll probably win, and not big enough, like you said, to have a variety of players with very compelling kind of outcomes and for maybe some of the reasons
you're gonna see, you could start throwing around names like Anduril and Shield, and
sure,
there's some players out there that are like fairly well established, AeroVironment, right? And like I think they'll continue to be big and grow. It's hard to like come into that sector and it's like, oh well, they're not building anything with this capability. And it's like, yeah, but if they figure out that it is a very valuable capability, like they're gonna step into that. So that makes some of that challenging.
Let's go over to energy. What do you?
Yeah, energy is like actually like the number one thing I'm looking at right now.
Why?
We're just so far behind. I mean, have you seen the charts of the China
2 to 10? I think 2 to 10 terawatts or something by 2030. Is that right? Did I get that right?
I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but you just watch them went from half of our capability a decade ago, or our production a decade ago, to like 2 or 3x of what it is now. And most of that is solar, but it's just energy in general. And like it's not that hard to trace back like energy. GDP is energy, like production in some way. Everything you do that is valuable requires energy. And we just haven't built that. We was so stalled out. So generation, but also distribution is top of mind for me. Like our grid is, if we're able to meet the demand, like not even try and match China, but we're able to meet the demand coming online from just growing our economy, even if you cut out data centers, which is like a whole other thing, our distribution can't keep up, which is a problem, right? So like just because you can make electricity doesn't mean you can get it somewhere. And so you have to start doing like localized grids and more distributed grids. There's all sorts of things to do. Like transformers take 18 to 24 months to get. Most of them are from overseas. That's like a key component. Elon just announced like yesterday or the day before that Tesla's going to start making transformers. So like he sees this. And so that's a huge problem. But like, and then you tack the data center stuff on, and like everybody is a mad scramble to secure energy. Multiple companies I'm working with are addressing this directly and hitting like a ton of traction, even in places you wouldn't suspect. Like one of them that I can't mention, but not an energy company. And yet their go-to-market now is going to be energy generation. So yeah, huge top of mind. So any way that can be addressed, whether it's something I'm looking at now that might do temporary energy for new industrial sites that last 2, 3, maybe 5 years, and then they move it somewhere else until somebody can get like baseload grid power. It's super cool idea. Like people, like time is money, right? And if I'm designing a factory that can be done next year, but I can't power it for 5 years, like you don't put the development money into it. But if you can get somebody to come in and be like, yeah, we can provide power in a year, with a power plant that's temporary, they'll build that right away.
Yeah, I don't think people have a good enough appreciation for investment decisions when you're talking about facilities and factories. I mean,
Mm.
these are like multi-year decisions, right? And so it's kind of like I use the example of like when you're trying to you're moving a boulder down a hill when you first start, it's super super hard. And so it's like all the foundational work has to go in now, and all this stuff has to be built just to get that momentum going. And then you start to see the results 3 years, 4 years, 5 years later. Because people aren't that patient. It's a problem.
There's patience, and there's the classic innovator's dilemma. And I've seen that actually play out in the transformer space, is where there is massive demand in the US. They want US built and they want it now. It doesn't have to be US built, but they want it now, right? The existing companies in the US, there's a little bit of regulatory uncertainty, a little bit of input materials on pricing uncertainty and availability. They need to sink $100 million into a new factory. They are, let's call it $1 billion company. That's a big decision. And so they sit on it. They're like, why would we do that when we can just make fat profits on our existing business units and know that we can charge more money? It doesn't have to be that fast. And so the demand's not getting met. Where you like normally look at the market, that demand would get met, but there's a fear around that. And I think that's actually one of the reasons Elon stepped in, right? Because obviously $100 million to Tesla is nothing. So he can take that risk, and he sees the demand. And I'd like to see, there's some other startups addressing that too, which is great because they can take that risk because, I mean, by definition, they're taking that risk.
I mean, I think this is where kind of policy can come in, right? And incentives.
Yeah.
I know the 100% depreciation up front makes a huge difference for a lot of folks looking to build facilities that the administration announced. But yeah, I mean, these are like deep, complicated problems, man. And it's like, I think my hope is you need a variety of actors
Mm-hmm.
coming together from a variety of different backgrounds and different parts of the economy and in society, actually, to say, hey, we have the will and the want to actually do this. Otherwise, it just doesn't happen.
Yeah, no, totally agree. It's not like a 10-person team that's well funded. It can go solve these problems. Like it requires government buy-in, like local government buy-in. The populace has to buy in, right? Because you're building like a factory, for example. It's all across the board.
Yeah, I had for about a decade when I was developing real estate in the city of Detroit. And it was very much like economic development, a lot of work with local communities beyond the actual work of like redeveloping property. And I got an appreciation for the amount of stakeholders that are affected, right? And with anything in the process that you have to go through. And if you don't have, it was very interesting, if you don't have a common vision, the overall vision, right? And like spirit, I would say it's actually a spiritual thing of
Mm-hmm.
like what's important, and understand, okay, some things might be a little bit worse for me but better for the broader community. If you don't have that, it makes it really challenging to have progress.
Yeah, you get like more pure NIMBYism.
Yeah, like pure, which make no sense
Yeah.
half the time. Okay, cool. So you are a aerospace engineer by training, as we've discussed. 5 years at SpaceX, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you founded Talon, which is how we met, an eVTOL startup for electronic aviation. So most early stage solo GPs that I meet that are starting funds or have their first couple of funds, they do not have the technical background such as yourself. First, working obviously at a place like SpaceX, working on rockets, and then having your own startup, and then now moving over to the investor side. So can you just talk a little bit about how your background plays a role in how you look for interesting technologies?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the most obvious is assessing what I see. I guess I would say like both I think a fairly quick BS meter, but also kind of the ability to like dig down in and think with a classic investing question is like, what could this look like for real? But I think the other things that are like huge beneficial is like I'm speaking the founder engineer language. Like almost without fail, the people I'm investing in are engineers or primarily engineers on the founding team, and being able to sometimes they get off a call and they're like, wow, those like it was nice to get hard questions about my technology. But when I hear that, I'm like, oh, I spent too much time on that. But I'm just trying to poke holes. And another term that is like pretty common, but I totally agree with, is the techno-economics. And that's what I'm really trying to poke holes in. Like the first pass is this real, feasible? It almost always is in some sense. Like it's rare that you see a pitch where somebody's just like making something up physics wise. But it's really about like, does it make sense from an economic perspective, and like where have these founders maybe missed something, whether it's a sensitivity or just a bad assumption that would kill the business model, or at least kill it at first. And if it kills it at first, is there a clear path that's fast enough to be viable? But yeah, it's really a lot of it's speaking their language and having been in the founder's shoes, like giving them often like pretty challenging advice on like, here's what you should be focused on. Like you haven't done enough on XYZ. And I've done that with a few of my portfolio companies where I didn't invest at first. It was just pounded them on some stuff because I've been through that and I've made a ton of mistakes. Like, yeah, just pushing founders on what have they missed and before you make an investment. And then, for them, worst case scenario, if I don't invest, is like poked holes in the places that should be poked holes. And they can address them either for other investors, but more importantly for their company, right? Like, so I do think that gives me like an extra edge, and where that also tends to show up is allocation. Right? Like, would you rather have somebody who's been in your shoes on your cap table and can help you through those problems, or somebody who hasn't?
Sure. What do you find most often, especially if you're mostly working with engineer founders, that they need help with off like from a non-technical standpoint?
Yeah, the hardest one is actually storytelling, and it's because it's so important in deep tech, because you're not making money for a while. So you're going to spend, probably best case is the first 3 years of your company telling a story. And maybe you get some government contracts that are non-dilutive, which gives you some, traction on the commercial side. But, savvy investors recognize like a phase 2 SBIR is a positive signal, but it's not a purchase contract from the government. And so you got to be a fantastic storyteller. And it's really hard when you have an engineer that's an amazing engineer and can't tell the story, because I've been in pitches where I'm like, this is the right engineer. In my opinion, it's the right technology at the right time. But I don't know if they can tell the story to get through the first number of years. And that becomes like a really hard decision, where it's generally a no, which is painful, because I want to see it succeed. If I'm in that boat, I want to see that succeed, right? I'm not excited about the technology and the timing. But sometimes you see engineers who are great storytellers. So it's definitely like most things. And it's also a very learnable skill. And you can watch people. I've helped coach people. My storytelling for my company time went from like, looking back, to me, super cringy, and then got a lot better. And I think if I like went and did it again, it would be a lot better doing what I do now. So that's super important and sometimes lacking, and can be a deal killer.
What did you work on at SpaceX? For and assume that most of the audience is not savvy on building rockets.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess I would call it a mechanical engineer then. It's technically a responsible engineer or structures engineer on Falcon 9 mostly, with some Dragon work. And mostly worked on Falcon 9 reentry. So reentry was like, for folks who don't know, like SpaceX basically took on an incumbent industry and said, we're going to make things cheaper with vertical integration, better engineering. We'll launch it. That was step one. And then the big idea was reuse the first stage for multiple flights rather than throw it away. And that really drives down cost further, but that had never been done. And it was certainly possible on paper, so we just had to go prove it. So I spent a lot of my time on like the aft thermal shield on the bottom of the rocket that allowed the rocket to come back. And it was like people hadn't done it before, so there's a lot of uncertainties. It wasn't like the most challenging structural engineering problem, but it was just tons of uncertainties. How do you make it cheaply and durable? And the loads we were looking at, they ranged like 5x, which is like unheard of in engineering because we just had no idea what it would look like. So a lot of time on that and a lot of time on the primary structure at the bottom of the rocket for both F9 and F Heavy, or Falcon 9 Heavy, the three stages hooked together. Went through the whole ringer with that one where some bad decisions were made up front and we got backed into an architecture that shouldn't have been there, and we were dealing with major failures on test stands that were costing the company a lot of time and money. So that was an actually really hard technical problem from a structural point of view.
When you're working on problems like that, is it even possible to have a very iterative process? Because you're launching rockets that often. Are you launching mini ones or in simulation, or how are you testing in the case of you're working on, the different aspects of a material of the bottom side of the rocket, let's say?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. We certainly did the iterative approach there too. And the way we did that is, rockets, like normal rockets, were a relatively known entity. So loads were good. We understood the materials. Sure, it's hard. Like the first 3 Falcon 1s blew up. And there were a couple Falcon 9s when I was there that blew up. But that was other problems than like an unknown. And so what we did for reentry was, for a while, the company, like the money maker, was getting stuff to space. And we got to just mess around literally with the rocket for reentry because it was all bonus at that point. Sure, it mattered, but like it wasn't going to change the cash flow until we, got it right. So we did all sorts of crazy things, like just cut holes in materials or like leave them off, or just added a ton of sensors all over the place, like way more than any other rocket would around that area, and just dive through the data when it came back. My co-founder and I, for the company, we spent a bunch of time doing something crazy, which was mounting a bunch of GoPros on the inside of the bottom, knowing that it would explode when it hit the water, and we mounted them to floatable pieces, and the debris would all get picked up, and they were like trigger recorded once it hit a certain altitude. And we could go find, if we put 10 cameras on there, we could go find 2 or 3 and then go back and watch the footage on what was actually happening, which gave us a lot of great data. That was like one of the classic super scrappy, super iterative approach that would never fly, literally at other companies.
Cool. So why aerospace engineering? So just give us a little bit of the background. I mean, is this something you were always connected to growing up, or?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been I knew I was going to be an engineer from a pretty young age. Always been pretty nerdy in that regard. And I mean, it really started like my grandfather was a pilot. He took me up when I was super young. My mom was a pilot. And then when in high school, I got my pilot's license. So I went into school. It was like I explored a couple engineering majors, but it was more like took a few classes of each, and then it was like went straight into aerospace. So I kind of just knew. And then I went to Scale Composites after college, which is like the best known prototype aircraft design company out there. So I got to cut my teeth on like real airplane design really early in my career, which was awesome.
That's great. Where'd you grow up? In
I grew up
California?
in Colorado.
Oh, Colorado. Okay, cool. All right, so let's talk a little bit of nuts and bolts of wave function ventures. So, kind of give us the size of fund, where you're at right now, and what you guys are doing.
Yeah, I'm just finishing up my fundraise, so I can't even say that. But it's a fun one, emerging manager. So compared to a lot of funds out there, it's relatively small. Doing, like I said, aerospace, defense, energy, robotics, infrastructure, all hardware level stuff. Really focused on pre-seed, some seed. Prefer to be like first tranche of money in or first money in, and which has been the case for the majority of the investments I've made. I've made 9 investments, kind of span all of those sectors, so I've hit them all, most of them already. And like I prefer like talking to the founder when it's still an idea stage and kind of doing what we talked about earlier, which is just working through with them, punching holes, developing it. And like I think we both get a lot out of that. What I get out of it is, the classic lines, not dots. And just to see it early, and then I can go in with conviction early. I've of course done other stuff. I don't have very strong theses that I'm following, but I have some theses. I prefer to be more opportunistic because I know I don't know everything. And there's definitely been stuff I've seen where I'm like, I want to be in this. It's happening fast. I'm not working with the founder over weeks and seeing it first, whatever, but like, I'm just going in because this is the right team and the right idea.
Great. I'll make sure we touch on this before we get into some rapid fire, which we didn't get into robotics and manufacturing. So actually, let's touch on that for a little bit. So when you think about automation or robotics, what's getting you the most excited about what's coming next in that space?
Yeah, so I have one robotics investment in a humanoid robotics company. Love it. It's doing shipbuilding welding robots. And I love it because it actually makes sense for humanoids. And I think there's been too much noise around some humanoid stuff at the wrong applications. I don't think household robots is the right place to start. I don't think automotive, like why would you replace a highly effective, fast system that exists already that's roboticized with something that's slower and more expensive because it looks cool? But this is like, they can't hire enough people. They've tried specialized robotics. It makes a ton of sense, and the team is killer. So there are a couple other humanoid companies that I like doing similar approaches. And then there's a ton of specialized robotics obviously out there. I think a lot of that makes a lot of sense. The hard part for me there is like differentiating like where in the value chain like you really get enough value out of it, and how do you differentiate with the others. I think the most exciting thing happening right now is the translation from all the work that's happened in LLMs to the physical world. And that's kind of just getting started. So, everything's happened so quickly, but like the last few years, you've seen all this stuff start spinning out of all the LLMs. You saw companies like Scale AI pop up that was just data. Now you're starting to see that kind of stuff get translated into robotics, both on the data side and on the model side. And I'm less excited about those companies like in particular, although I do think there's a ton of opportunity there. But what do they enable? And rapid learning of a task in a dynamic environment, I think will unlock some more things for sure that have traditionally kind of plagued specialized robotics.
Yeah, I heard. I had a conversation with Bernd Bornich from 1X as in the humanoid space,
Yeah.
and we were talking about this. So obviously, like the big missing link is obviously just training data for the real world, right? and he was describing how like the data pyramid flips, and how he was like, most people don't have an appreciation that the internet's actually really small when it comes to the amount of data. And he was like, it's going to be the folks that have the biggest, the most diverse data set that is gonna that are gonna win these spaces. And so it just seems like, I don't know, I'd like to get your perspective. And I don't know if you spent much time there, but obviously training, and now there's a lot of synthetic data approaches, but training is definitely the bottleneck for a variety of things in the real world. Do you have any thoughts on like, does that get solved anytime soon? Or I don't know if you spent much time thinking about how to solve that gap.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen at least 5 pitches in that sector in the last few months, and I'm like lightly working with somebody on one of theirs. Wouldn't be an investment because it's a little bit off thesis, but I just like where it's going. Yeah, I think that data can be not generated, can be gotten relatively easily. Yeah, sure, you're not just like downloading the internet and sifting through that, but it's not going to take anything too crazy, I think, to generate a lot of that data.
In what you're seeing in that space, is this a variety of different, are these like different like methods of training the robots, or is it like kind of creating synthetic data out of different real world situations, like
Most
kind
of
of?
what I've seen is gathering real world data.
Okay.
So not generating it, but actually gathering it. I think synthetic is hard at this stage, right? Like synthetic in the like earlier AI applications didn't come until a ton of data had been gathered, right? So it's like harvest what you can, and then as you learn enough, you can start to more easily generate synthetic in more scenarios. But there just hasn't been a ton of the gathering side yet, and so it could be like the most compelling stuff I've seen is camera based, because you can just put those places, and the computer vision systems are so much better than they were now. All you're just doing is applying it in a new way. But it could also be like on human sensors of some sort. I think those are a little bit harder, but might add, I don't know if I'd use the word tuning in this case, but like a grounding to your camera data, right? That might say, okay, here's what actually happened when the camera saw this, and I can just kind of tune my other data gathering sources. But I think we're just getting started there. I'm less educated on the training side. I do think that's potentially a bigger bottleneck, because I think the data can be gathered, but applying that properly to the robots, I think might be a little bit harder than people think.
Well, I mean, people tend to forget, right? I mean, a ton of AVs, that's exactly what that is, right? And it's just like, think about how long that's taken to get where it's at, and how difficult of a problem that is to solve, right? So it's like, you're trying to do that for, obviously it's a different thing for a very specific task, but you're trying to do that for all different tasks and activities, and having to take into account social context and how these machines can speak to one another.
That's why I think the specialized applications or humanoids are, like, for a lot of reasons, but that's one of them, is like you go gather the data for that specific activity that's super high value and high risk. Not stick a million cameras in a million homes and watch people do, like, I don't know, if you start doing combinatorial of what people's different behaviors in their homes that you're trying to train on, like, that's crazy numbers. Versus like, I'm going to go move these pieces of metal around, weld these pieces of metal in a confined environment that's well defined. It's a little bit has echoes of these specialized robotics, just in a different form factor.
Sure. Cool. All right, you ready for some rapid fire?
Sure.
All right. So you've been an operator, you've been an angel investor, and now you're over on the VC side. What do you have, like, one main piece of advice for any deep tech founder that's out there looking to get their idea funded?
One main piece of advice. I mean,
Just one. Main thing, the most important.
Storytelling. Like
Storytelling. All right.
I would say, like, if you don't have the technical chops and the right idea, like, you're kind of DOA. But a lot of people have that. Get your storytelling down.
How about going after a deep tech or hard tech problem and you're not technical?
Good luck.
What's something? What? Get a technical co-founder. What's something that you believe specifically about kind of the reindustrialization movement or deep tech that you would say most other investors would disagree with? Anything kind of
it's like enough of a sector now that, like, don't think any of my opinions are all that unique. Everything I can think of is like, I know 3 other people that think similarly.
I like the deference. I like that. All right. So of the 3 areas or the areas that we went over that you're investing in, is there one that you think that you're the most excited about that most people are overlooking?
Ooh, that are overlooking. I mean, I'm starting to think about some fringe things here. I don't know if I want to say them, but I think, again, like, there's enough energy in and capital and people that playing in the edges, I think, has become very difficult. I think it's come back to, like, what it's not as crowded as VC in general kind of is now. But who wins in VC prior to this it's whatever it's deal flow and support of the teams and winning deals. And I think this sector, like, is mature enough now that that's a lot what winning is coming down to. It's picking the right ideas, the right teams, but it's seeing them too. So yeah, it's not as outside the box as it was.
Is there anyone either on the investing or operating side that's put a big inspiration for you? You really respect his or her work to share?
Yeah, on the fund side, I think my biggest mentor has been Mike Nunziata at Also Capital. He's in a similar sector. He's like one fund ahead of me. We think similarly on a bunch of things. We disagree on a bunch of things. He's non-technical, but, like, he's been a good mentor. I respect him a lot. On the operator side, I mean, a bunch of my founders, like, there's a reason I invested in them.
Cool.
I respect them a lot. Otherwise, just throwing out big names that everybody knows.
Where can founders or other potential LPs reach you? How can they get in touch?
Yeah, the easiest is just email, I guess, or Twitter. I think I'm just Jamie Gull on Twitter. And email is Jamie, Jamie, @wavefunction.vc.
Cool.
Yeah.
Great. Well, we'll put those all in the show notes. Well, Jamie, I appreciate it, my man, and good luck with the final close. And look forward to hearing when you can announce all the details.
Real number. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Thanks, man.